Hello my dear students, welcome to your online class. Today in this class, we will be discussing about the chapter Weathering and Soil Formation. In this, the specific topic to be discussed today is weathering. So then let us understand what is weathering. Weathering is breaking of rocks. Very simple and very easy to understand that if a rock breaks, that is known as weathering. But this weathering takes place in different ways and different types, and hence we add these terms even in definition of weathering. As like saying, here I have written it, breaking of rocks either mechanically, chemically or biologically. Weathering is breaking of rocks, or you can also call it disintegration of rocks, mechanically, chemically or biologically. These three terms is used in the definition to denote the processes involved in how a rock breaks. But there are certain factors to understand that how this rock breaks. As not every rock type breaks at the same time or breaks with the same intensities, or it breaks because of the same factor. It breaks because of various factors. But two most common things that we try and understand that how rock breaks is that climate and rock type. The breaking of rocks depends on the type of rock it is and the outside factor or the physical factor outside it, that is the climate. So these two factors most importantly govern the breaking of rocks. While we come across the book, we get to know the term as erosion as well. Though erosion and weathering are two processes, in fact natural processes that takes place on the earth simultaneously, and yet seems to be very clear, similar to each other, but we find difference in the processes related to weathering and also to that of erosion. There are more differences and details given in your book, but few points to highlight about if we are to differentiate weathering and erosion. The first thing is the definition itself, wherein we said weathering is breaking of rocks or disintegration of rocks, while erosion is removal of the top layer of the earth's surface. The earth's surface, which is made up of rocky layers, the removal of that top surface is known as erosion. Now, the next is what we see with weathering is when the rock breaks, they remain in the place where they break. But erosion is not like that. Being a dynamic process, it involves in not just breaking of the rock or removal of the topsoil, but also involves in transferring the sediments from one place to another. That is, transportation is involved. So that is why erosion is known as a dynamic process. Well, both erosion and weathering complement each other, because weathering, after the rock breaks, that means when weathering is caused, thereafter erosion becomes much easier, because those finer sediments that are broken while the rock breaks are very easily carried by the agents of erosion. While erosion helps weathering to take place by removing the top layer of the earth's surface and exposing the larger rocks from inside the earth's crust. So these are a few differences between weathering and erosion. Well, in more you can get it from your books. Now we shall discuss about the types of weathering. As we already discussed in the definition itself, that there are three processes involved usually in a rock to break, that is mechanical or mechanically, then chemically or biologically. Let us try to understand what these types of rock actually means, or the weathering of rock means. So we see types of weathering. We have mechanical weathering, or you can also call it physical weathering. Then you have chemical weathering, and then the third one you have biological weathering. When we say mechanical or physical weathering, there is some force that is acted upon the rock which leads to the breaking of rocks. So those forces are known as physical factors. So you can define it as mechanical weathering is a breaking of rocks due to physical effect, mostly climatic effect. And in this breaking of rocks, that is physical or mechanical weathering, you will not find the rock changing its chemical composition. It remains the same. That means the broken fragments is the same as like that of its parent material. For example, you see this, I have a chalk in my hand. The chalk seems to be white in color and it is longer enough to see and to write. Now, if I take this chalk and apply a force to it, then I see the chalk is broken into two fragments. One is a bigger one, the other is a smaller one. This is how mechanical or physical weathering takes place. With a force applied, the rock breaks, and this is known as mechanical or physical weathering. But what is needed to be understood very well is that there is no change in composition or chemical composition in the rock while mechanical weathering take place. Again, the chalk, the bigger one and the smaller one. Earlier, this chalk, before I broke it into two pieces, was one single piece. Now, when I break it into two pieces, the smaller part as well as the bigger part, both are white in color, both writes white, and both are solid. If I crush it, then we have white powders coming out, all the same. There is no change in its chemical composition. So this is mechanical weathering. The second one that we come with is with chemical weathering. Chemical weathering is a breaking of rocks due to change in chemical composition. Now, it does not completely break into two pieces, or does not break into pieces, the rocks. But what happens here is, the rocks undergoes a change because of certain other factors affecting it. The best example of chemical weathering you can see is iron. Rusting of iron, in fact. You see, iron, if you take a piece of iron, keep it outside of your house for a day or two, and then after a day or two, you see the iron will have some powdery feature, like some powder kind that is on top of that iron. So that is called as rust. If you just play your hand around that iron or along with that iron, you'll find a reddish color in your hand been printed. So that is rust. So this is how chemical weathering takes place. And biological weathering, it's breaking of rocks due to plants and animals. You must have seen plants growing quite tall and very thick and big, and their roots are also very strong enough to hold them. So sometimes we find these roots enters into the rocks and then helps in breaking of the rock. So this is known as biological weathering. So thank you.